All right, well, it is 11:30 and we're going to get started. And I see that more people are coming on, and that's great. So welcome again to our webinar, Hybrid and the Future of Work. I am Kate Meredith, Vice President of Commuter Services and Twin Cities Telework. Today's presentation is part of the Twin Cities Telework webinar series. We are recording this webinar and will provide you with a link and a copy of the full slide deck within a week of this event. We'll keep the webinar available on our Commuter Services website and on our Twin Cities Telework website, which can be found at www.tctelework.com. Twin Cities Telework provides free telework resources for employers, managers, and teleworkers, thanks to an appropriation of the 2021 Minnesota State Legislature. We thank them for the support that makes these valuable resources accessible to every Minnesotan who needs them. We will share more about Twin Cities Telework at the end of the program. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Kevin Eikenberry. Kevin is a world expert on leadership development and learning. He is the Chief Potential Officer of the Kevin Eikenberry Group and co-founder of the Remote Leadership Institute. He has helped organizations across North America and leaders from 49 countries on leadership, teamwork, communication, and more. Twice he has been named by Inc.com as one of the top 100 leadership and management experts in the world and has been included on other similar lists. He is the co-author, author, or contributing author to nearly 20 books, including bestsellers Remarkable Leadership and From Bud to Boss, Secrets of the Successful Transition to Remarkable Leadership, The Long Distance Leader, Rules for Remarkable Remote Leadership, and The Long Distance Teammate, Stay Engaged and Connected While Working Anywhere. His blog is ranked among the world's best, most read, and most shared on leadership and has been visited over 5 million times. Kevin, your book, The Long Distance Leader, Rules for Remarkable Remote Leadership, is a wealth of excellent guidance. We particularly like the first rule: think about leadership first, location second. And we know you wrote this book prior to the pandemic, and its principles are so relevant now. We are very excited to learn more from you, so welcome, Kevin.
Kate, thank you. And thank you all for joining us today. I think I am the only one who's not in Minnesota. I am in Indiana. Sometimes I'll say I'm in Indianapolis and people think I said Minneapolis, but no, I live in Indianapolis, and I'm so glad to be with you all today and to share some things with you. So as Kate said, to those of you that were, as you were joining, at this point, you've probably been in lots of Zooms over the last few months, year and a half, 2 years, whatever. It went from being something you heard of or did with your grandchildren to being something you do all of the time. And so I really do hope that you'll open up that chat window when there's so many of you and only one of me. We are using the webinar mode, so you can't be on video with me, which probably makes you happy. But what you can do is interact with me and engage with me. And I hope that you'll do that. So open up the chat window, just leave it up. If you don't know, across the bottom, hit that chat button, open it up, just make it a little bit large so that you can see what others are saying, but also so you can ask your questions of me and share your experiences with me. There'll be several times throughout where I might ask a simple question, a yes or no type of question. I hope that you will just answer. I'll try to use names when I can, but I know there's a whole lot of people with the name of Megan, I think all joining with the same login, which is of course perfectly fine. So if I say Megan, you're going to have to say, oh, that's me that asked that question. Anyway, I just hope that we can make this as engaging and participatory as we possibly can in the next hour and a half, which of course is one of the challenges that we've all faced as we've been not in the same physical space, right? And at the end of the day, the most valuable thing of what will happen as a result of you having been here is taking action. So I hope that as you participate and as you think about how you can use it, it's really all about that. It's not about what I'm saying nearly as much as, okay, how could we use this in Ham Lake? How could we do this in our county? How could we do this with our company? That's the most important question, is to think about that. as we go. So you all, in one way or another, raised your hands to be here. I'm guessing no one's here against their will to be at this session. So I always like to start by thinking, why would people care? Why did they choose to come? And so I think that the purpose for today comes down to that you want work to work, right? Like we know it's not going to be the same. So how do we make sure it's going to be effective? I think that we all want that, and likely you want to lead better, or you want to help other leaders lead better. So you're either here with your leader hat on, or thinking organizationally about how we can support other leaders in doing that as well. So you can be thinking about that, and as well as, we all know that things have changed, are changing, and there's change all around us. And so we realize that leaders must change, and that's really the big message of today, right? So if this is true for you, if any of these four things or all four of these things are true for you, you are absolutely, for sure, in the right place. Because that's what we're going to spend our time talking about, is what does this whole hybrid thing even mean? And what does the future of work look like? And how do we make it work? And that's what I hope to help you think about for the next little bit. Okay. And I told you that I was going to ask you to participate. And so here comes the first chance for you to do that. I have a question for you, and I'd like you to think about this. And I'll give you a second to type in your answers, if you would. What is your biggest concern about a post-pandemic working world? And you might have several. And I know that some of you, or maybe several of you, in the same on the same connection. So I don't want your whole brainstormed list, but I'd like, what is the biggest thing? What's the thing that's worrying you, concerning you the most? What is the thing you're not sure how you're going to overcome? And I'll give you a second to think about that and share with me. Lack of connection, lack of social interaction. Not having a relapse. What's going to do to our downtown? When will we go to things will return? That thing. Oh, maybe Catherine, what you're saying is you're concerned that it will go back to the old status quo. Teams feeling not connected with partial in-office and partial work from home. All right. Inconsistency. Staff want it one way. Ownership isn't ready to get on board. Someone's concern is losing their mind. I hope that's at least slightly tongue in cheek. I really do hope so. Connection. Not as much in-person consultation. Okay. Anybody else? Loss of communication, inability to work remotely. Okay. People know those people aren't going to be allowed to, it sounds like. Disengaged employees. We're going to definitely talk about that. Alicia, is it better for my career to just go into the office? How can I be just as good at remote? Okay. It's a really good question, Christine. You're not the only one who's thinking that, I promise you. And we'll try to talk about that a little bit as well. Anybody else? Give you about one more second or two to do that. Yeah, now I understand why my daycare lady wanted to talk to adults at the end of the day. Okay, so I asked you this question for probably three reasons. The obvious one is I wanted to get some input from you. Not everyone is great at communicating when working remotely. Fair, Melissa. So I wanted to know what your concerns were. That helps me to sort of frame and adjust and connect what I'm going to do for the next hour and a half. That's for sure. The second reason that I asked the question is for you to note how many of the things are similar. Right. So maybe a third of you typed in there, something in that vicinity. Here's my observation. That most of them were stated in one way or another more than once, which means that if you're feeling something, you're not the only one feeling it. I can promise you that. And so maybe one of the best things that you can actually get out of today is the stuff that I'm worried about, the stuff that I'm concerned about, the stuff that's happening in our organization. Is it just us? Is it just me? Let me tell you emphatically, the answer is no. There's not a single thing that you all put in the chat that I haven't heard before. And I don't say that to negate what you said. I say that to validate what you said. And while for some of those things there aren't simple answers, there are things that we'll talk about today that will help with almost all of what you put in there. And I promise at the end, if there'll be time for us to loop back. And if there's anything I didn't quite get that you want us to talk a little bit more about, we'll be able to do that. I promise. And the third reason that I asked the question is a very practical one. While this session is not about leading virtual meetings, if we're going to be in some sort of remote workplace in the future at some part of the time, then we probably need to get better at having meetings like this, right? And so let me just give you a little tip. And that is, if you want people to interact with you in a virtual meeting, one of the best things you can do is get them interacting with you early. The earlier you get people to get in that chat and do something, or to raise their virtual hand, which you don't have turned on here, or to go off of mute and say something, the earlier you do that, the better chance they'll do it later. So there are 3 reasons, all of them important, as to why I asked you that question. Okay, so where are we headed today? Well, there's a bunch of stuff that was promised to you when you registered for this. We're going to talk about different hybrid models a little bit. We're going to talk about best practices and some latest thinking. Hopefully I can share some of that, how we can be confident in the future of work, talk about the power of expectations, and give you some specific ideas about coworker resentment, and productivity, and home office stipends. There was a question that came in about that, so we're going to talk about that a little bit. All those specific things, and ultimately, I want to answer your questions as to why you came, and then make sure that you leave, or I'm going to encourage you to leave with a plan of what are we going to do with what we just learned. So that's where we're going to head. There's a lot there, and so I think we'll just dive on in. Again, throughout, I will near the end have a slide that says what questions do you have. But I want you to share them when you have them. Don't hold them up and wait to the end. As you already see, I'm watching the chat. I've got it open here. And I will monitor it as we go, and hopefully I won't miss anything. So if you've got a question, why don't we just ask it? That's why it's here. So why does all of this matter? Because we all want our people, whether with our leader hat on or our teammate hat on, to have the right skills. When we have the right skills, and we apply them in the right ways for a new world of working, when we have those things in place, then we will have teams that are successful in this new future. And if we can get there, then we can have a thriving culture with people staying and not leaving, and we can get better results. And I know that we've got people in different, public and private here and all those sorts of things. So you define what results are, right? But the reality is, if we get the right people to have the right skills and are using them in the right ways, then these good things can happen for us. The one thing that was on the slide with my picture on it, when Kate was introducing me, that she didn't say, that's probably the most important thing that we probably should have said, is that, oh, by the way, Kevin's been leading a hybrid team for over a decade. So I have a team of people spread across the United States, from Las Vegas, Nevada, to South Carolina, to Virginia, to Indianapolis, to Michigan, to someone living in their RV currently near Tampa, Florida. So we've been doing this a long time, as well as working with other people on it. So hopefully I can share with you practical ideas as we go, as well as sharing what I'm seeing and what we're seeing looking into the future. Okay, here's the truth. The truth is that being a leader is hard. I'm not telling you something you don't already know at some level. The work that we are doing when we have our leader hat on is not easy. It's complex. In fact, I've had the chance to work with leaders from NASA. And if you ask leaders from NASA, and remember, these are rocket scientists, if you ask these folks, which is harder, building a rocket or leading people, guess what they say? Leading people, because it's far more complex, because we're leading people who are both inherently amazing and wonderful and complex and messy. And so while we can put the numbers in the formula and check our math and get a rocket, there's a limited number of right answers. Being a leader is much harder and more complex than that. And as hard as it's always been, and as much harder as it's gotten during the pandemic, I hate to tell you, but it's going to get harder. Why? Well, because the complexity level in the future of work is going to be higher than it's ever been. Let's go back to, say, February of last year, right? When the complexity level looked like, well, most everyone works in the office most every day. Every once in a while, maybe someone has to telework for a day or whatever. But for the most part, we're either here Or we've got some folks that are, salespeople, or they work in a remote office or whatever. Like, for the most part, it's black or white. Now, not so much. I used to say it was black and white. Now it's shades of gray. It's not shades of gray. It's colors of the rainbow. We're going to talk about what some of those complexities are. And those complexities start with, and the most obvious complexities are, where are people physically working? But it's not just that. It's far more than that. And some of that showed up in some of your questions or some of your concerns that you shared with me in the chat. The future of work is flexible. The future of work is not the same as it's always been. The future of work is probably not the status quo, even though some of us are concerned that that's where we're headed in our specific organizations. We'll talk about that too. So what are the biggest differences about where we're headed from where we've been? Well, we could make a long list, but I'm going to give you three things. The big differences. The first is, I already mentioned complexity, but let me tell you a little bit more about that. Again, it used to be, well, either people worked together or they didn't. And most of us worked together in the same physical space, 5 days a week from 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 or whatever. But the reality is the future is going to have far more models of what work will look like. And there's more than one final answer. There's more than one right answer. It's not like we're all trying to figure out the one, we're all going to benchmark that, and that's the answer, because everyone's situation is going to be different. I'll say more about that in a second. So perhaps the biggest and obvious difference is that the future of work is far more complex than we've ever had to deal with before. And while we've certainly experienced this in the last few months, that there are plenty of unknowns, that's not going to go away either, right? Someone's concern, I don't remember now whose it is, I don't have time to scroll up, said that they're worried about their biggest concern is that we have a relapse. So, we could have another set of times where we're sending people back home if things have opened up, or if in our communities we're going to mask up again or stay masked up longer, or whatever that might be. We don't know those things. And that's just a small amount, or one small example of what we don't know. There will be plenty of unknowns, specifically as it relates to the work. How will employees respond to these changes? How will it make a difference what we do and how we do it and when we do it and all those things? There are plenty of unknowns. And again, someone mentioned in the chat that their concern was that we're going to head back to the status quo the way it used to be. And I can tell you, in talking with leaders in the last year and a half from all over the world, that there are a lot of leaders that are in the boat of, we need to get everybody back to work so we can maintain our culture. It's not just senior leaders, and it's certainly not all senior leaders, but it's certainly some. And the biggest message that I would share to them and that I would share with you, regardless of where you are, if you're like, man, I want us to create a new, different future. But even if you want to bring everybody back, here's the reality. We can't go back. This has changed the way we think about work forever. Even for people who work in healthcare or hospitality or food service or logistics or manufacturing, where they've continued to be in the same place, all those people are thinking about work differently, because now, even if their work hasn't changed, the world has changed. And they're wondering, maybe I should find a job where I don't have to commute every day. And 100 other open questions. The reality is we can't go back. If your organization is saying, or if you're saying, I can't wait till we can just get it back to the way it used to be, I'm going to tell you right now, it's never going to be the way it used to be. You can bring everybody back, but everyone's had 20 plus months of a different working experience. Some of them loved it, some of them didn't, but they've all figured out how to do some stuff differently. And since it's like stepping into the river, the old story is that you can't step in the same river twice. We can't go back to where we were. It's not possible. And I would even argue that we may not want to. Here's what I mean. Some of the folks that most are advocating we need to get everybody back to work the way it used to be are some of the same people that might have been trying to hire me 2 years ago to help them work on their organizational cultures. In other words, we got to maintain our culture, but if we go back 2 years, remember, like, it wasn't perfect. There were some things about it we loved, and then some of those things we need to maintain. And the question then is, how do we maintain those things? For sure. I'm not trying to say we shouldn't do that, but to say that what we had 2 years ago was perfect, and there's nothing to learn from the last year and a half, is just folly, as well as being impossible. And the last thing I'll say about that is that the longer it goes between when we were all in the office and when we're not, the longer it goes, we have what I call the good old days syndrome, which is the more time between where we are and where we were, the more we think the way we were was perfect. Man, wasn't it awesome back when? Well, there were some awesome things about it, but there were some things about it that weren't great then either. We just start to forget some of those as time goes on. Even if we want to go back, even if we do bring everybody back, we can never go back because it's never going to be the same. Now, you might be surprised that we've gone for 20 minutes and I have not yet, I don't think, used the H word yet, that word hybrid, right? That's the big word these days. And I can tell you that 3 or 4 years ago, we started talking about hybrid teams. And I wish that I could say that when everyone talks about hybrid, they quoted Kevin as the source of that phrase. Of course, that's not why people are calling it a hybrid. It's a logical name to use. And it gets thrown around now. And I have found that the longer we throw things around, the less clear they become. And that's clearly the case with what a hybrid is. So let's talk about what a hybrid is, and we'll go to the dictionary first. Right? A hybrid is the offspring of 2 plants or animals of different species or varieties, or a hybrid is a thing made up of combining 2 different elements, a mixture. Right? So those are reasons why the word is so useful to us, because we're creating a new mixture of the way we do work. So what is a hybrid team then? Well, a hybrid team could be full-time co-located workers. Some people come to work every day and some people stay at home and work every day. That's hybrid. Hybrid could be people who are in the office sometimes, but flexible other days. And maybe some people are there in the same days and some people aren't. It could be teammates who are co-located on specific days. Some people are here on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and some people are here on Mondays and Wednesdays. It could be any sorts of other flexible things, like whether we're in the office or not, we're working at different times of day, which is a part of hybrid that most people only think about place, but it could also be time. It might include hoteling. We're not going to have a desk for everybody. When the days that you're in, you're going to have to sign up for a desk. That's a whole other set of things. It could be any of those things. It could be some combination of those things, or it could be something else. So hybrid could mean lots of different things. I want to share something from my life as a metaphor for this that I think might be useful. I grew up on a farm in Michigan, and I happened to serve on the board of directors for the world's largest popcorn genetics company in the world, which simply means this: the seed that we create and produce is then planted, which leads to more than half of the popcorn people eat in the world eating. Like, it's at least a 50% chance that the popcorn that you eat this weekend, wherever you eat it from, came from seed produced from our genetics. So we're in the hybrid popcorn business, right? So how do we create hybrid popcorn varieties? Well, here's how it works. We take two different popcorn varieties and we cross them. We create a hybrid of them through breeding, right? And not in a test tube, it's non-GMO. We create that cross and a new plant is created, right? Here's what we know. The new one will be different than either of the other two. We know that for sure. It will be different. What we don't know is if it will be better, right? So we create it with the intention of getting something better. All we do when we create it for sure is know that we get something different. But the goal is to create the new one that's better, right? And beyond that, what we know is we have to define what better means. What kind of popcorn what are we trying to do here? Are we trying to make a stronger stalk? Are we trying to create mushroom popcorn, which is the kind of popcorn you choose when you're making caramel corn, the little mushroom shaped kernels? Or are we trying to create popcorn for theaters, which is butterfly popcorn, the big open kernels? Like, when we create this new one, is it doing what we wanted or not? So we test lots and lots and lots and lots every year to find the ones that are really better. And the last thing that you need to know, which you might know already, is that there's more than one variety. We don't just produce one or two, we produce a bunch. We produce different varieties for different climates, different soil types, as well as the different types of popcorn we're trying to create or produce, right? So I think all of that, while maybe slightly interesting, is incredibly instructive for us when we think about creating a hybrid or considering a hybrid workplace, right? When we do something new now, that's not the same as everybody in or everybody out, it will be different. The question is to make sure that what we do that's new is actually better. I can guarantee you it will be different, get you different kinds of results. The question is, can we get better results? And so we do lots of tests, and you may not get your right answer the first time. So your version of testing might be like, once we do whatever we decide to do, whatever our hybrid is going to be, for example, or if our answer is we're bringing everybody back-ish, mostly, right? Like, we're still going to be tweaking it. Don't feel bad. Don't be surprised if you still do some testing and tweaking after you make your decisions. Okay. And some of you may have made your decisions. In fact, let's just do this in the chat. I'll make a point about this last one here. In the chat, just tell me yes or no. Yes, our organizations have already decided where people are going to sit and work in the future. Like, you've already figured out your hybrid or your work thing or not. Yes or no. Just give me a yes or no in the chat. Okay, cool. So for those of you that are on the yeses, excuse me, for those of you on the no's, I think I'm getting no's with both caps. Maybe there's a message in that. It looks like more no's than yeses. Everything we're going to talk about is going to apply for all of you, but that's helpful for me to know. Thanks for that. And here's the thing. There's more than one right answer. We produce more than one variety of popcorn, different conditions, different situations. How do we decide? We're solving for some set of criteria, right? And I believe how you should go about it, especially if you're in the no category of what I just asked you, you should be saying, what's our right answer? And if you're in the yes category, you should be thinking about this next slide. Your right answer isn't necessarily the same as the next county or the next organization, the people that share the office building with you. Your right answer, here's what we're solving for. Your right answer is determined by the work, the expectations, and your desired culture. Those are the big things to be solving for, right? So it's important for us to think that through a little bit. And so rather than saying what's somebody else doing, that's the policy we'll implement, I wouldn't recommend that. Now, you can look at other people's policies or approaches to give you ideas, nothing wrong with that. But ultimately, you got to say what's unique about where we're at, what we do, where we're trying to go, the nature of our business. Are we growing or are we shrinking? What do we expect from our folks? What do we want this culture to be like moving forward? That's how you get to your right answer. Now, I am not in a position to know much about all of you except see some names. And so I don't know how old everybody is, but I can tell you with some amount of certainty that I'm probably older. I'm definitely older than some of you, probably older than most of you. And I can tell you that when I think about this moment in time, sort of as we think about organizations, this moment in time, there's never been a time like this in my life. And in fact, I think there's only been two times in my working life that have had a fundamental change in work. One of those being the introduction of the PC in the workplace, and the other of those being the widespread use of the internet, both at work and in work processes and in the general population. And both of those two things happened over time. They were sort of gradual changes. They sort of like all of a sudden, oh, here it is. Not so much this time. Right? On sometime around March the 17th of last year, we said, everyone's going home, work from home, figure it out. And now we have time to figure out what we want it to be moving forward. Here's my point. This is a moment that matters. This might be the most momentous moment, if you will, of your professional life. The choices that we make now, both in the choices themselves and the way we implement them, can have and will have huge long-term implications on our organizations. This is an inflection point. And when we have an inflection, things can either go up or they can go down. So I'd like to think about these being inflection points of us having up and to the right kinds of results, but not everyone will that be true for. And if you're sitting there saying, Kevin, I answered yes to your question, we've already implemented, now I'm worried. No, it's not too late. Remember, hybrid is about ongoing testing. Worry not. Okay? Worry not. But know that there's good reason why a webinar with this title is being offered. Because this is a moment that, like, one we've never experienced before in our lifetimes as organizations. And so it's an opportunity for us to do some things that can make a huge long-term positive impact on how we get things done, attract the right people to our teams, and lots more. Okay. So Kate said some nice things about the long distance leader a few minutes ago. And so I want to say a little bit more, not about the book, but about something that we introduce in the book. And that is the nature of our role as a leader. She said that the first rule of remote leadership is leadership first, location second. She's absolutely right. We wrote it. We believe it. Here's the thing, that we've been leading for a long time. And the fundamental role and the fundamental underlying job of a leader hasn't changed for a very long time. Context has changed. Context is changing, right? But let's talk about what the leader's role is. The leader's role is identified for us as what we call the 3O model. Let me describe the 3 O's. So leadership is about outcomes, meaning what? Leadership is about reaching valuable outcomes or results, achieving something we haven't achieved before. If all we're trying to do is stay the same, get the same outcomes, we don't need leaders. The status quo requires no leadership. Leadership is about reaching valuable outcomes with and through others. We can't do it alone. There's a team, right? It's with and through others. And then there's us in this mix, because who we are and how we focus on the other two has a huge impact on the other two. Leadership isn't about us, and yet we play a huge part in the outcomes and others components. And I'll just give you a simple sort of current example. And that is, if you are burnt out, if you are highly stressed, it makes it very difficult for you to successfully lead. Because how can you be at your best for your team if you're not at your best? Like, if you're not taking care of you, how can you take care of your team? Very, very difficult. That's just one example, right? Ourselves in this mix also says that we need to be a role model for others in terms of how we're going to achieve these things. Leadership is without question about outcomes and others. And who we are plays a huge role. Now, that's not changed. That's how we frame it, right? But that hasn't changed in a long, long time. But there's something about our current context that's changed a good bit, that helps us, that we need to think about. And I think this model helps us think about it. And it's the tension, if you will, between outcomes and others. And I don't mean tension necessarily in a negative way, although in the popular press and in the media and in some conversations, it's being framed that way. Here's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the tension or the balance between, well, we've got a job to do, we've got work to do, and the employees saying, but we don't want to come to the office anymore. Or why should we have to do that? If you don't give me what I want, I'll leave and go somewhere else. Now, that's kind of stated in an either or way, but you follow my point. There's been a lamenting of the balance of power, if you will, has moved to others and away from the business. The reality is, as leaders, we must keep both in focus. It's not about one or the other. It's about both and. And I share with you this way because I think there's so much of this pull of this one way or the other. And to the point that someone made about the concern being that we're going to go back to the way it used to be, the question would be, why is that? Why are people wanting to go back to the old status quo? Is it because we really haven't been reaching the outcomes? Or is it because that's what they're comfortable with? You can see if it's about what they're comfortable with, then it's not really about outcomes, it's about them. And that's part of this. And we've got to be clear about that and honest about that as well. And as individuals, you say, well, I want this, this, and this. And I say, that's awesome. And as a leader myself, I want my team to have those things as long as and concurrently with us reaching the outcomes of why we're here. So if we as leaders, so here's an example. Early in the pandemic, lots and lots of organizations rightfully shifted the balance here more towards the folks. Like, we got to make sure everyone's doing okay, make sure people are figuring this out, and maybe we're not quite getting everything done. Project plans slipped a little, deliverables slipped a little bit. And then a few months in, people said, wait a minute, we can't just do that. We got to get the work done. And so people started pulling us back the other direction. And what we don't need is to whiplash back and forth. We need to find the right balance. And as leaders, that's our job. It's always been our job. It's just the context of it and the demands of it are different than they've been. Leadership is about reaching valuable outcomes with and through others. That hasn't changed. We just have to be thinking about it in new ways. And actually, what I just described is a great way to help you think about, for those of you that said no a minute ago, it's a great way to frame up how we come to our decisions about what the future of work will be, or what our first take on the future of work will be. Okay. As always, if you've got questions, ask them. If anything about what I just said wasn't clear, or you want me to say more about them, drop them into the chat. If you're just quiet, I'll either think you're taking a nap or you're writing so furiously that you don't have time to comment. But in all seriousness, if you've got a question, ask it. That's what I'm here for. I got slides, but I want to take care of your needs first. Okay. And what I just said is outcomes and others, right? I've got an outcome to reach in the next 53 minutes, but it's only being done for the purposes of taking care of your needs. So if you've got stuff I need to know, please let me know. You've got a question, ask it. So let me ask you a question. How do you define success in a job? Right, for an individual, what is success? Well, the only way ultimately that we can define success is for people to deliver on the right expectations. Now, why do I say those two things? I say those two things because I believe that 95% of people, 95% of the time, want to be successful, want to do the right thing, want to do good work. Not everybody, not every day, but most of us, most of the time, want to be successful, want to do good work. And how do you define success? On the expectations. So if we've set the right expectations and people are delivering against them, we should have success. That should be our definition. Right? Again, helping us think about outcomes and others. And so right now, this idea of expectations has never been more important. And here's why. Expectations are more important now than ever. I will tell you that in working with, coaching, consulting leaders for the last nearly 3 decades, I've been talking about that word expectations from the beginning. Never have I believed it more profoundly than I do now, how important it is. In part because they are less clear than ever. The expectations of what success means for individuals doing work is less clear than ever. Okay. It looks like I've got a question that came in. Let me just see. So the question come in and says, how can employees who do not have decision-making role influence the decision-making for what the future will look like, particularly if the decision is made top down without consulting employees? Okay, I'm going to hold that for a little bit. Okay, I love the question. Promise we'll get to it. Kate's going to make sure I don't forget, and I'll get back to it. But I want to stay with this expectation thing for a bit. Okay, so here's the deal. I'm telling you that expectations are less clear than ever. So why is that important? Why does that even matter? For a second, I want you to think about you. Many of us are here as leaders. I realize that. But for a minute, I want you to think about you as an employee. All of you as leaders, likely still have a leader, still have a boss, right? All of us, I want you to think about you with a boss. And I want you to think about a time in your career when what was expected of you was really clear. You knew what success was. Your leader or the situation had allowed you to know exactly what success was, what clear expectations were. And so think about that moment or that time or that relationship with that leader. And I can tell you with some certainty, some things that you're thinking. That when expectations are clear, we're more confident. Now, we might not be able to deliver quite yet, but we know what we're aiming for and we know what to shoot for. And we might be confident in the fact that we can do this at the 85% level and we can get the rest of the way there. We are more confident when expectations are clear than when they're not. Think about it when expectations aren't clear. Think about how uncertain we are. Think about well, I'm not sure. I'm doing my best. I don't know if it's the right stuff or not. So when expectations are clear, we have greater confidence. When expectations are clear, we have higher levels of trust, right? When you know what's expected, when you know what success is, that's a sense of having trust from that leader. You have more trust in yourself. You have more trust that you can deliver. So there's greater trust all the way around. We could have a whole conversation about how valuable trust is to organizational success. Clear expectations help create greater trust. Clear expectations create less conflict. The number one reason for workplace conflict is unclear or unmet expectations. Well, I thought that's what Christine was going to do. I thought Andrew was going to do that. That's not my job. That's Bonnie's job. Bonnie thinks it's my job. I think it's Bonnie's job. And so that's unclear expectations. Is that where conflict comes from? Often. So if expectations between Bonnie and I are clearer, the chances of us being in conflict are reduced greatly, right? Greatly. I see the other question, Melissa. I promise you I'll get to that too. Okay. Why else do clear expectations matter? Because there's less rework. Oh, now I know. I'm sorry. I didn't realize that you need that. I can fix that. Let me go tweak this presentation for you now. Let me go change that report. I'll get it right back to you. Just give me a few minutes and I'll fix it. Tomorrow I'll have that for you. But if I'd have known on the front end, there would have been no rework. But I had it the first time. Have you ever had any of this happen in your organization? Well, listen, if expectations are, if I'm the leader and Brian works for me and I've made it really clear to Brian what the expectations are, and I know that Brian knows what they are, am I less likely to micromanage? Yep. I might still, it might be a habit. I might be working on it. I might be that good at it yet, but am I less likely to? Yes, I am less likely to. And guess what? When there's clearer expectations, we get better results because success is defined by delivering on the right expectations. And so if I know what the right ones are, I have a better chance of delivering, so we get better results. Imagine that this slide that I gave you these 6 bullets and said, I can give you something that will get you these 6 things. Do you want to raise your hand for that? Of course you are. I'm just telling you right now that when we have in our organizations, across our teams, with our team members, when we have clearer expectations, we get all these things. So right now, they're less clear than ever. But when they get clearer, we get all kinds of good things. And when we aren't clear, we get all kinds of challenges, including the ones I just shared and a whole bunch more. right? So if we can get them clear, it's going to help us a lot, right? But there's one more piece. I've been telling you that things are more complex than ever. There are more expectations needed now than ever. Now, chances are, as I've been sharing this with you, you've been sort of thinking about the expectations of the work, right? Like what needs to be delivered and when it needs to be delivered and how good does it need to be and all that stuff. And that's certainly part of this picture. But I don't think there's just one kind of expectations. I think there are three kinds. Let me explain that and then dive into those. The first one is the what of the work. That's probably the stuff you were thinking about. As I've been chatting and sharing with you some examples, you were thinking about the work itself, the delivery of the work product. But there are also expectations about the why of the work. Right? I'll explain that in a second, and as well as the process of getting the work done or the how of the work. So let me unpack all that for you. The what of the work is, as I said, it's the quality of the work product, it's the delivery and the timing of the work product, it's the specifics related to it. What are the parameters? What are the benchmarks? What are the metrics? That's the what of the work. And I'll tell you that that isn't always clear enough, but even if you got that, it's not enough. And even if you had that with your entire team when you sent everybody home to work, if you've added anyone to your workforce since then, or if anyone's changed roles while they were away from the office, do you think those what expectations are as clear for them as they might be? Bet not, or certainly possible not. I'll guarantee they aren't unless you've been very consciously aware of making sure they are. And if they're not clear, we've talked about why that's a problem. What about the why of the work? This is the second piece. The second piece is the why of the work. And this is answering the questions, who am I doing this for? What's the purpose of it? What do they use it for? Have you, as examples, have you ever had someone give you something to do and you didn't have the answers to those questions? Frustrating, isn't it? Do you feel like you did your best work when you didn't know the answers to these questions? No chance. Could you bring your expertise, knowledge, and intellect to bear? No, you could basically just comply with the request because you didn't know. You're operating in a bubble. There's not that there's been anybody operating in a bubble for the last year and a half. The other issue about the why of the work is that when we are, our physical environment impacts our perspective. When people came into the office, they could see the nameplate on the door when they came in. They could see things on the walls that reminded them of where they were and what they were doing. They saw the people that they work with. They literally knew who they handed work off to in some cases. There were metrics on monitors in hallways. There were chances to interact with people. So some of the whys of the work might have been clearer then, may not have been clear enough, but they were clearer then than they are now, when all I can see around me is the south end of my dining room table or my cat across the room. So the why of the work matters a lot. And by the way, I'm not just saying that about now, I'm saying this about the future, right? And then of course, there's the how of the work. This is the process. This is how we're going to communicate using which tools at what timelines. And this is the way we collaborate and make sure we're including all the right people at a given situation to achieve the what of the work. And this is about the work process. So we've got to work clearly and carefully to get all this, to make all this happen. Just the facts. Okay. When we can get all of these clearer, we have a much better chance of success. And the nature of the last number of months is that chances are it's less clear. Now, I can tell you again, as someone who leads a hybrid team, it's certainly possible to make these all clear, but I can tell you as a leader, you have to work way harder to make that happen than you ever did before. Even if you were doing it well before, which many weren't, you got to work harder at it now than you ever did before. The what of the work, the why of the work, the how of the work. And then once they're mutually clear, let's see, this isn't just about you being clear and telling them, well, I told them. This is about them understanding it. Once they're mutually clear, now we create metrics, right? Now we can report and measure, like, you know how to do this stuff. right? And now we can update and improve and check progress and follow up during one-on-ones and all that stuff. Okay. All that stuff. Okay. A couple of questions have come in. I'm going to hold the one a little bit longer, but Melissa asked, we have long heard that the ideal mix of working remotely is 1 to 2 days per week. What are your thoughts on that? Maybe. Right. It's a great question. It's a fair question, Melissa, but I'll go back to the right answer for you is looking at what are we solving for? We're solving for the nature of our work, the expectations we have, the what, why, and how of the work, and the culture that we're trying to create. And I think for many that might be right. It will not be right for all by any stretch. Why is it 1? Why is it 2? Why isn't it 1 day in and 4 days out? I don't know the answer to those things. I know the right questions for you to ask, right? I think to answer your question a different way, Melissa, I think that's where a lot of people will start. And I don't think that that's bad. I'd prefer that they thought through what they're solving for more first. But if we start with some combination, we've got a better chance to adjust. I've said this idea about flexing and adjusting a lot so far, which says something else, which means that we as leaders organizationally need to make sure that we're telling our teams, this is where we're going to start. We're going to think about outcomes and others. We don't have to say it that way, but we're going to think about outcomes and others and keep checking to see if what we're doing is getting what we want or not. We reserve the right to make adjustments. We want your input too, right? So now to the other question that came in earlier, I'm just an employee. I don't have any control in the decision making. The decision is going to be made top down. How can I influence this? Well, the way to influence it is to ask questions about outcomes. Not in an accusatory way, but in a tactful way. Ask curious questions that say, so not how did you come to this decision, but like, what were the factors that we used to get here? How will we know if this is the right answer for us long-term? Like, I know we have to start somewhere. How will we know? What are the criteria that we're using and will use? Right. I mean, those are just a couple of examples of questions, but this starts with, I actually love the way the questions asked to start because, excuse me, I love the way the questions asked to start because it starts with how can I influence it when I'm not in a place of influence, which is the thing I think is exactly the right way to ask the question. Recognizing that I don't have the power to decide, how can I play a role? If the decision hasn't been made yet, and even if your culture is very top down, offer to say, hey, I know this is going to be a hard decision. I'm happy to share insight. I'd be happy to provide feedback. If there's anything I can do to help as we come to this decision, I'd be happy to help. I think you're going to get some of the questions to ask from the nature of this conversation today. So hopefully that's helpful. So for that person who asked that, if I need to give you more, tell me, and I'll do that. Okay. All right. So what are some skills that we all need now? Well, we talked about several things already, but I want to give you some very specific things. I'm going to give you a sort of a list of things to think about. That if you get better at these things, I promise you'll be more effective leader in the future. Okay. Number 1, leading great one-on-ones. 100%. Number 1, we need to have one-on-ones. The need to have them is higher than it's ever been because we're not seeing people in the hallway. We can't say, oh, by the way, we can't say, hey, step in my office for a second. So that means we need to be having them on a consistent, standard basis. How frequently might depend on the person, the nature of the work, a whole bunch of other factors, but we need to, number 1, have them. We need to do them effectively. Then we need to do them great. Because if we can have great one-on-ones, we can have far more success as leaders, and we can help our team members be more successful, feel more valued, and be far more likely to stay. Leading great one-on-ones. Now, by the way, this slide, I could probably spend, I know I could spend 2 hours on any one of these 6 bullet points, right? So I recognize that I'm going to go quickly on these. And I also recognize that if you've got a question about any one of them, you can ask me and we can talk about them more before we finish. Okay. So skill number 1, leading great one-on-ones. Skill number 2, practicing empathy. You know, none of us would have wished for COVID. And it's been hard for everybody, and some in different ways. Some of us have been ill. Some of us have had folks that we care about be gravely ill, maybe even lost somebody. Last I read was a third of Americans know at least one person who died of COVID. I'm not saying, by no means am I trying to downplay the importance of or the negative nature of the pandemic. And I believe there are good things that have come and will come from it. And one of those is that, especially early on, there were many leaders who figured out they needed to be more empathetic, spent a little bit more time checking in with their folks, were making sure that people had what they needed, understood what they needed. I hope, and it's not been every leader, of course, but more than ever, I hope that that is a lesson that we remember. I believe that, and I've read some recent research that says that CEOs are now listing empathy as one of the most important skills for new leaders. I would say right on. I would say it's always been important. We just now have been reminded by the slap in the face called COVID that says we've got to do that. So let me give you an example about how to practice empathy. At the start of every one of your one-on-ones, and at the start of most of your short interactions with your team members, which are now done, via the phone or via a Zoom call or whatever, is to start with feelings. Feelings first, then the work. So how are you doing? What's happening? What's going on? How are your kids doing in school? What's happening? Like whatever that might be. It's really the question that we always ask as a throwaway question, like, how are you? But no, it's asking, like, no, how are you? You're not asking to solve, you're asking to listen. One of the reasons leaders don't want to ask those kinds of questions is they're afraid they won't have the answers. Guess what? Your team members don't need your answers. They need your ears and attention. And so when we can work on practicing empathy as a leader, we will create a more empathetic organization. We can start to create that across our teams. Is highly, highly important. Okay. Practicing empathy is one of the skills that we absolutely 100% need now and in the future. Next is the ability and the willingness and taking the time to build relationships. Like, we all know how to build relationships. We've done it our entire lives. Some of us are maybe better at it than others, but we sort of know that. We talk a good bit about that in the Long Distance Teammate, about sort of how that happens and how we can do that and why it's so important. So here's my lesson for you, as a message for you as a leader here. This is an important part of your job. Maybe more important than you realize. It is not your job to make friends with the people that you lead. It is your job to have strong working relationships with the people that you lead. Why? Because people want to follow people that they know, like, and trust. And when we don't have as much proximity and we don't have as frequent of interactions, it can weaken our relationships. So we have to be intentional about changing it so that we're making this an important part of our job. It's got to be a part of our job. Here's how I do this, or how I try to do this. I probably like you, or like most people, have a list of things I want to accomplish every day. I have a couple of things that are always on the list every day because they recur, because they need to happen all the time. And one of mine is the rule of 4. The rule of 4 is that my goal every working day is to have real interaction with 4 members of our team. Now, for context, there are 15 on the team. They don't all report to me, but my goal is for to have a real interaction with 4 people every day. I'm not like saying these 4 today and these 4 tomorrow. No, but if I go a week and I haven't had one with Chuck, then I need to work on that too. But my goal is 4 a day interactions. Here's what happens a lot at work now. pick up the phone and Alicia is my boss. And I say, Alicia, I know you're busy. I know you don't have a lot of time. I just need a second of your time. I ask my question. She answers me. And I say, thank you. She said, we say goodbye. That is not an interaction. That's a transaction. And there's a time and there's a need for us to to transact the business. We need to do that, of course. But in that moment, if Alicia takes a second, so everything going okay? What do you need? Anything I can help with? And even if there's not every time or she asks me about the Purdue basketball game tomorrow because she knows how much of a fan I am, then what does that do to our relationship? Goes up. Right? Oh, there you go. Boiler up indeed. I got to stop, move on. Right. But so right there in that moment, like I already like Allison more. I don't even know her. Right. Because we have something in common. So one of the ways we build relationships is through more frequent interaction, real interaction. Another way we build relationships is through deeper connections. So we should also be making sure that our teams are making sure that they're keeping their relationship strong. And the longer we're working in a hybrid or remote way, the more likely you're going to have brand new people. Or let's say your future is some sort of hybrid and you got these new people that are never in the office the same day as some other people. How are they ever going to build relationships? Unless we make it happen. How do we make it happen? One of the things that we do several things in our organization. I'll give you two real quick. One is we use Slack for instant messaging. You might use Microsoft Teams or whatever. Have a channel, have a group, whatever it's called in your particular platform. We have one called Water Cooler. And that's what we talk about in the water cooler. Stuff you talked about at the water cooler, stuff you talk about in the hallway, not the work stuff, the non-work stuff, the stuff that makes people laugh, the dad joke, the interesting link that we saw to something, the wishing people happy birthday, all that stuff. Water cooler channel, number one. Number two, and probably really number one, when a new person joins our team, one of the expectations in the first 2 weeks is that they're going to have a conversation with everybody on the team, 30 minutes-ish, without talking about work. So if a new person needs to talk to Guy, needs to talk about what they do at work, great. You can talk about that for the first 20 minutes, and then you can talk about getting to know each other. My expectation is that we have working relationships. So I put our time where my mouth is by saying we're all going to do this. And I do it with everybody too, not as the boss, but as a teammate. If we don't have that starting point, how can we build it from there unless we do that? I'm not teaching you anything about building relationships that you don't know. I'm telling you it's highly important for us as the leader and across the team. We've got to practice it. We got to work on increasing productivity. Well, I could spend a lot of time here. Let me just give you a couple of ideas here real quick. Idea number one, productivity is not about activity. It's about accomplishment. Productivity is output per unit time. Productivity is not busy. If you're going to be working in a hybrid model, which means some days you're coming to the office and some days you're not, you have to have two separate sets of productivity routines. Because the way you managed your day when you were at home was different than when you were in the office, right? Now you're going to be switching back and forth. Most people haven't even thought about that, let alone know what the right routines are. So getting better at building our productivity as a leader, as well as helping our teams do it, is going to be more important than ever. And listen, time management courses have been on people's lists forever, but we got to get past, you can't even manage time. All you can do is manage choices. And so how do we help all of us be more productive? If we can figure that out, we can solve the work-life balance challenge. Because productivity isn't, throwing hours at it isn't more productive, it's less productive. Let's just real quick, we're going to play Family Feud in the chat. Are you ready? Just real quick. Before the pandemic, the average American had a 27-minute commute each direction. So the average American had a 1-hour commute, right? So I started asking people after the pandemic started, people were working from home. I started asking people what they were doing with their extra hour. How were people spending the time they used to spend commuting? In the chat, I want you to give me if you're playing Family Feud, like I got like 6 answers, right? What do you think the most common answer was? Working, working, sleeping. Keep going. Sleeping, sleeping, work. It's all sleeping and working. Netflix, yeah. Family, housework, on their phone, sleep, exercise. So by cooking, okay. So here are the answers I got. I got sleeping. I got exercise. I got personal improvement. I got hobbies. I got family. Number one answer by far, work. And when people answer that question by telling me that they were spending that time working, I say, are you getting more accomplished? Then I got blank stares. So if I'm throwing an extra hour at my day to get the same amount done, that's not more productive. That's less productive. So one of the things we can do as leaders is learn how to be more productive ourselves, ask the right questions about productivity, know how much time our people are spending. Is that what we want them to be doing? How can I get leadership to show more empathy when they think they're really empathetic already? Well, that's a good question. I hope your boss isn't watching. So I would say, in short, given the time that we have left, my answer would be more empathetic yourself. Go first. When you share a concern, be willing to share a concern. Help them see something that maybe they haven't noticed yet. Don't worry about them being empathetic in general. Help them become aware of an issue that they're not yet aware of. That'd be where I'd say to start. We could probably spend a long time on that, but we're going to move on. We need to continue to build the skill of leading change, being effective in change. There's more of it than ever. There's no doubt that we could get way better at that. And if you're in fact going to have some sort of a hybrid team of some sort, we got to learn how to build them. We got to learn how to create them. And you'll be the first public group I'm telling this to, but our next book will be about, so we've got a book about the leader at a distance, a book about the teammate at a distance. The next one's going to be about the team at a distance. And it will include a whole bunch of stuff about how we design and create the team that we want, depending on where people are working. It will include a lot about culture, et cetera, et cetera. So there's 6 things: leading great one-on-ones, practicing empathy, building relationships, increasing productivity, leading change, building hybrid teams. The question is, how good are you at those things? That's a good question. And if you're in a spot where you can influence what we do in terms of developing folks, then those are things worth thinking about. Okay, that list might be worth you thinking about. So at the start of this session, and I want to make sure I leave some time at the end for whatever open questions you have, continue to put them in as you have been. Some specific things came up that that I was asked to talk about. I'm happy to talk about, and I've heard them before, especially mostly the first 2. So here's the first one: coworker resentment, which is some people get to work at home. I don't get to. Why not? And so the way we deal with coworker resentment is it starts by removing the home field advantage. I think this is my only sports analogy of the day. Like, you know what home field advantage is, right? Home field, home court advantage. Like, if you're the home team, like, it's easier for you. Like, if you're the home team, things go a little better for you, right? You're in the in crowd. So what does that mean in the workplace? Like, you know what that means in sports. What does that mean in the workplace? Well, that looks like home field advantage manifests by the leader not focusing on the whole team because they're leading and managing by the line of sight. So the people that they see are the ones that get the opportunities. Oh, I could use some help. Are you available? Right? The opportunities, the promotions, right? The question I often get is, how do I get noticed if I'm the one that's working from home? Like, how do I even find out? How do people even know that I'm doing a good job? Right? That's a fair question. And we as leaders got to make sure that we're not just looking line of sight. And so it feels like a home court advantage, home field advantage to those folks, right? So how are we doing orientation? How are we doing onboarding? Are we leaning on all the people in the office to do that? Well, they may not see that as a home field advantage, but it is, because they're the ones that get to know the new folks better, which makes their jobs easier. And it makes the people who are out feel like, well, I don't have any say in any of that. I don't even know what's going on anymore. How does home field advantage play out, it plays out in the formation of cliques. When you were in high school, you knew what a clique was. You might have been in it, right? Or you might have not been in it. And sometimes when we're in it, we don't realize we're in the clique, but everyone who isn't in knows. Here's why we know it's a clique, because it feels like you can't get in if you're not in. How does it happen at work when some people are in the office and some people aren't? Well, we go to lunch, we get to know things. We're not trying to leave people out, but we have the inside stories. We know what's going on with people. We remember what happened on that afternoon. We have that laugh about it. Other people are like, it's a whole other world. Don't even know any of that stuff. It isn't necessarily that the people that are together are trying, but it may happen. And I get a comment that says, we hear the coworker resistance. Now the opposite, not everyone is able to work remotely due to their jobs, right? So it can be for the people who are out to feel like there are issues, and we're talking about some of those, but there's the other one, like I want to work from home and I can't. So then the question becomes, as a leader, what do I need to do? First of all, do I even know that they feel that way? Step one. And then number two, what can I do to help adjust, if anything, that? Because one of the reasons for the resentment is they don't even feel heard, understood, acknowledged. Right? There may be really good business reasons, organizational reasons why that person, because of their job, needs to be in the office. But do we know that they're resentful of that? Do we know that that matters a lot to them? What could we then do, if anything? And even if we can just let them know that we understand. See, when we have some people in and some people out, we end up with unintentional exclusion, right? So let's say Clara and I are having a conversation about something and we totally forget that Emily needs to know. If we were all in the building, we just said, hey, we went and grabbed Emily and talked about it, but we finished this conversation, moved on, forgot all about, and now Emily's like, what's going on? And now, while it might have been unintended, how does Emily feel? Not good. She feels excluded. Not only she feels it. And so she feels it and she begins to resent us, or she begins to worry about that, or she begins to wonder if we care about her, or and on and on and on. Can a clear policy ease resentment? Maybe. I would say that since resentment is a feeling, I think we might be trying to give a little too much credence to policy. Certainly, if we have clear policies and clear expectations, it's going to help a lot, right? But is it going to, it might ease it. I don't know that it automatically gets rid of it, right? Here's one. Everyone at home's got a webcam, but if we're in the office, we don't have them. Right? So now I'm in the office and Jessica's not, and she doesn't really like to be on her camera, but she knows she's supposed to be, but I don't have to turn one on because I don't even have one. Make sure we've all got cameras. There's a good reason for them. We could have a whole conversation about that if you wanted to. We don't have to use them every single minute, but there's a good reason for them. Just like this is a way better session because you can see me than if you couldn't. You can say how good it is. But the point is, it's more effective because you can see me than if you couldn't. And that's one of the reasons why webcams are so useful for us in the workplace, because it's the next best thing to being there when we can't actually be there. But now I'm out here, or Jessica's out here, and she feels left out. And then I don't love being on the camera, but I know I need to, but then they're in the office, they don't have to. That didn't make any sense. Not having agreements about how and when to meet, because otherwise we'll naturally remember when we see someone in the hallway, right? We'll naturally remember because we see them that we need to talk to them. And so I say, oh, I need to talk to Mary. There she is. And I just grab her and we have a conversation. But I might have not remembered to have that conversation with Mary if I see her. So we need to come up with a process. We need to come up with a rhythm and a cadence about how we're going to interact with each other, both across the team as well as the leader. And those are some, and so make sure that if, you know, in many of your cases, I think, especially if you're working in a county, whatever, everyone's in the same zip code, even perhaps, or certainly in the same time zone, but make sure that we're taking taken those things into account, like the time of day and all that sort of stuff. What we're ultimately trying to do is avoid people feeling like this. And this could go to the question that came in. This could come from either direction, right? This could be like, you clearly like them better because you let them work from home, but I still have to come in and have my 27-minute commute. Thank you very much. Or it could be, clearly I'm not getting any opportunities because I'm not there and they are. So clearly mom likes them better than me. Could go either direction. As a leader, we've got to make sure that we're overcoming this and acknowledging that as best we possibly can. So if we're having a hybrid meeting, who has the advantage? The people in the office. We just tell you this. And my team, when there are people in the building with me and we have a meeting with people who aren't, we don't have a hybrid meeting. Everyone's on their webcam. They're down the hall. I close my door, they close their door. We're both on the webcam along with the 3 other people. We don't have a hybrid meeting. We have a remote meeting. Take away any advantage, intended or unintended, to being in the room. The energy that comes with being in a room and then you're the one person that's not. Information sharing happens way better for the people in the building than those aren't, right? We forget to send the email, or I tell the people there, and then I'm going to send the email later, and I send the email later. But before I send it, the people in the office send an email or send a Slack message. And so people feel like they're not in the loop, even though they get it from me. But by the time they get it from me, they've already heard it. So it doesn't matter anymore. Right? Where does delegation go? Where do new opportunities go? How people feel about being delegated to could change whether that's a good or a bad thing. But who's going to get the stuff? The people in the building, most likely. Unless can we overcome all these things as a leader? Yes, we can. Only if we're intentional about it. Right? Giving people visibility, making sure that people are seen, making sure that they know they're being noticed, even if they're not physically being seen. Making sure that the technology that goes to webcams and a whole lot more. We have the technology to work effectively for wherever we happen to be working, right? Maybe people at home don't have as much bandwidth, and so we can make it work, but it's not the same as when people are back in the office with high speed. Are we onboarding people equally? Worth thinking about, right? Access and availability to the leader. Big deal, right? And then, of course, we've already talked about relationship building. Our job as a leader is to level the playing field. That's our job. Level the playing field. Okay. Okay. Yeah, work remotely every other day or week. Here's the thing. If everybody works every other day, but the leader only works every other day, then they're only going to see half the people. So is the leader going to work every day, but everybody else is every other day? Like, again, there are all these things you have to think about and figure out. And so if you're not going to be on is the leader going to come in randomly so they sort of see everybody equally? That would be one way to level the playing field. How easy is that for the leader? Maybe that's hard for them. Like, all of these are the things that you have to figure out in your organization. The nature of the work, the expectations, and the desired culture that you want. Okay. So we've talked about the coworker resentment piece a little bit. What about productivity dashboards? It starts with understanding productivity. Like, what are we measuring, right? So, and I've already said a little bit about this, right? So, yielding productivity in the dictionary is yielding results, benefits, or profits. So it's about, as I said earlier, output per unit time, results per hour, output per day. Productivity is not about hours. It's about getting more of the right things done. It's one of the ways that we get to balance, right? So if we remember that productivity is a measure of accomplishments, not activity, then we can start creating dashboards that are measuring the right stuff. I mean, you don't need me or want me to talk about, I don't think, about the technology of how to build your dashboard or what that all looks like. There are smarter people than me about that, and it's all the nature of your technology and all that stuff. But the point is, we need to make sure we're measuring the right stuff. And if we're having productivity dashboards, we got to make sure we're measuring accomplishments and not activity. Really, really important. Okay. Last specific topic is home office stipends. People sometimes ask me that question about, well, should we do that or not? It's totally up to the organization. Like, I know how we do it in our organization. We don't have a stipend. Pretty much everyone on my team has a business credit card. I basically say, get what you need. And I had to go to a couple of people and say, you have 2 monitors when you're at the office. Why don't you have 2 monitors at home? Or I actually had that conversation backwards. Like, when you're here, you need another monitor. So let's get another monitor. Or whatever it is, like chairs, all that stuff, lighting. So if you're doing a good job of being an empathetic boss, then you should know where those needs might be. Are you asking those questions? If you don't know, here's a question. Do you even know where your people are working from at home? Do they have a separate space? Are they in their bedroom? Are they in the north end of their dining room table? All those things could lead to what they might need. How you actually do this, whether you're giving everyone a blanket stipend, all that depends on your organization, the culture, the needs, your budgets. It's the right question. You have to come up with the right answer. The goal should be making sure people have what they need to be successful. Who's going to own it? How we're going to get it to them? All that's for you to figure out based on your situations. Okay. All right. So when I go back to your list of concerns from the beginning, I think that we've addressed most of them in one way or another. So I hope. I have a couple of more minutes before I have to hand it off to Kate. So anything from the concerns that I didn't address that you'd like me to address, or do you have any questions or ideas, anything at all that now's the chance to ask me whatever you want to ask. Anybody? How do you balance paying salaries with being equitable and the geographic cost of living differences? Oh, so you're talking about me specifically, right? Because I have people living all over. So I have the advantage of being a relatively small company. There are 15 of us, of not having to be locked into some sort of specifics around salaries. And so those are all, in our case, individual decisions around what's going to make sense based on meeting their needs as well as the needs of the organization. I'm just working to balance outcomes and others in that regard. So I'm probably not the perfect person to answer that question, although it's a super fair question to ask. I know there's a lot of conversation about, are we going to pay people less if they move to a less expensive area, right? I think there are challenges with that. Like so I don't know that I have sort of big consultant answers here. And it certainly, again, depends a lot on the size of your organization and how much flexibility you have there or not. Right? How do you support people from becoming too isolated? That's a great question. I think that, number one, do I know how isolated they might be feeling? We had an epidemic of loneliness in the United States before there was a pandemic. Before COVID, we already had a problem with loneliness and isolation in this country. It certainly didn't get better in the last year and a half by any stretch. Right? So I think we support people by making sure we understand it, by knowing their personal situation, and certainly by keeping them from being isolated as a part of the team, which means encouraging them to spend time with their teammates, having a virtual cup of coffee, just like they would do in the office. We didn't have to tell people they could have a cup of coffee together in the office, but somehow they don't think they can do that when they're, at home. Why not? Like by making sure that they know that you want them to feel included and not be isolated. So we need to know where they are on that, and then do what we can to help them overcome it. And if we're talking about isolation at the level of sort of where it's becoming a significant, serious mental health issue that goes beyond our capabilities, and we're not a professional, then we need to think about things like EAP or whatever that might be, employee assistance that might be available or whatever. But I think the question really is coming more from how are people doing thing? I think if we start from the place of empathy, it's probably the best place to start. Sometimes people just need to be heard We need to encourage them to reach out to their teammates, to encourage them to reach out to us if they need something. Make sure that we're having the conversations that are interactions and not just transactions. All that will help. Okay. I said at the start, the only thing that matters is that you take action from this. You may have taken a bunch of notes, and Kate already said you're going to get the slides. And so maybe said, I'm not going to take notes because we're going to get the slides from Kevin. All that's awesome. The only thing that matters here is what are you going to do on Monday or this afternoon differently because of what you got? Is there one idea, two ideas that you got that you can take action on? Because doing something first is the key. I told a group that I was with a couple of days ago, face to face, that there's a big difference between deciding and doing. And at the end of a session like this, man, there's a lot of good stuff I can decide. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. I hope you will decide, but I really hope you take action, really do something, because then it will make a difference for you, for your organization, for your customers, for your community. So you may have had this is like a bunch of, 60 people to one person, right? And you may have had a question you didn't want to ask in the larger group. You weren't sure how to ask. Maybe you've got something you want to ask me later. You can send me an email anytime. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to have you do that. That'd be awesome. There's all sorts of video, both Remote Leadership Institute channel on YouTube, as well as Kevin Eikenberry channel on YouTube, all sorts of resources there. I'd love for you, their Twitter, you can go to kevineikenberry.com, you can go to remote-leadership-institute.com, all kinds of content to help you about leadership, future of work, being successful personally and professionally. And it'd be an honor to help you with any of those things. In fact, I'm going to give you one chance real quick, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Kate. So get ready, Kate. If you're a LinkedIn person, and you spend any time on LinkedIn, and you want to get, a chance to win one of these books, if you go to LinkedIn and you connect with me, send me a note on LinkedIn and say, hey, I was in the Twin Cities Telework session with you, Kevin, and I'm hoping you'll pick me to win a book. I'm going to give away a couple books. But if you're not a LinkedIn person or you don't want a book, that's cool. But if you are and you want to have a chance to win a book, go to LinkedIn, connect with me there. And with that, I'm going to say thank you to everybody, mostly to Kate and Melissa for inviting me and for having me. And I think maybe I'm going to have the chance to help you all some more in the future. And if so, that's awesome. But regardless, I have enjoyed this. I hope you did as well. I hope you found it valuable. And Miss Kate, it's all back to you. I'll move the slides for you and get off my camera.
Thank you so much. A very, very big thank you, Kevin, for all the great information, for your time, for your expertise. We are so appreciative. So to sort of wrap things up here, want to tell you a bit more. As I mentioned earlier, we are recording this webinar, and we will provide you with a copy of the slides and a link so that you can share the webinar with others or watch on demand. I want to tell you a bit more about the Twin Cities Telework program. The Twin Cities Telework webinar series is one of several free resources provided on our Twin Cities Telework website at tctelework.com. Visitors to the website will find resources for commuters, managers, and employers, all free by request. Or if you have a specific question in mind, drop us a line through our Ask an Expert feature that's on our website, and we will get more information for you. We will get you the answers. You will find the latest research in our Telework Trends articles and updates, and you can register to receive our Telework newsletter. And coming in 2022, we're planning 3 Telework focus groups, one for teleworkers, one for managers, and one for employers, to help us identify the next set of tools you'll need and the trends you'll want us to watch. Information on how you can help us plan for the future of telework and hybrid work will be included in upcoming Telework newsletters. So sign up for that and you'll stay connected. And again, thank you, Kevin. Thank you to our hybrid team here for all the work that was put into the webinar today. If you have questions or you would like to participate in one of our upcoming Telework focus groups, please contact myself or our Executive Director, Melissa Madison. And again, thank you for joining us. Have a great rest of your day and a great weekend.